Haunted house workers of Reddit, what's the worst thing you've seen happen while on the job? Story 1. I worked one in high school my junior year. I wore a black skin suit so that I was basically invisible in the low light of the house. I was told that I wasn't to physically touch any of the visitors to the haunted house. The organizer placed me at the end of the house in a hallway with open rafters above me. I hung onto the rafters and waited for someone to show up. About an hour into my shift, a group of teenagers showed up, and as I had many times before, I dropped from rafters and howled at them. The fun part about this group of teenagers is that they were packing knives. Every last fudge one of them. They all pulled them and one shouted at me, "Who's scared now?" To which I promptly said, "That would be me." I backed against the wall and the group walked past me, thank God. A few minutes later, the on-duty police officer came by and asked how I was, and I told him what happened. When my shift ended 30 minutes later, I found the officer helping the kids that pulled the knives on me into his and another police car. TLDR. Teenagers pulled knives on me. Officer helped their delinquent jerk into police cars. Answer. Yeah. I think one of my worst things about working as a scare actor at a Halloween attraction is the fear of basically being beaten up every night. I first started working at a huge one in South England age 16, still currently working there, now aged 18. I'm small built with long black hair, so am often picked to play the creepy child, the possessed doll, the damsel in distress, the witch, etc. Because I am particularly little, I find that a lot of people, especially men, take advantage of this and assume that they are able to intimidate me and show that they have control over me. I never had anything as severe happen with knives or the like, but some of the main things I experienced was a lot of inappropriate groping by large groups of boysmen whilst successfully trying to intimidate me, trying to be kissed, being pushed, tripped over, kicked in the shins, punched in the stomach, slapped in the face, headbutted, etc. Sometimes a lot of this is a reaction to being scared and being made jump, but then the majority go out of their way to actually hurt the actors and get kicks out of playing punch the actor. One incident I will always remember is when a huge group of men came round, maybe about 30 or 35 years old, definitely tipsy, saying things to me like, "You're disgusting and you deserve to be punished. We're gonna bend you over and brutally fudge you up the arse. You're so fit, I'm definitely gonna bang you. You little slag, look at you. I am gonna fudge you right here, right now. Filthy whore. I bet she loves it up the arse. Let's give it a go." I was on my own and I was terrified. I felt sick and I didn't know what to do. Thankfully, one of the other actors came round, so nothing happened, but it shook me up for a long time. If the other actor didn't, then who knows what might have happened. Things like this not only ruin it for the actors, but it's not exactly a great experience for the customers either. Edit. Missed a word out. Story 2. I worked at a haunted trail in high school. The worst thing that happened was actually to a fellow worker and not a guest. His chainsaw had run out of gas, and instead of using a flashlight to see where he was pouring the gas, he decided to use a lighter. Story 3. My friend worked in one a few years back. He went to scare a girl, but she just looked him straight in the eyes, through his chute mask, gave a creepy smile, then grabbed his junk and began to squeeze and pretty much bringing him to his knees. Lucky for his little pals, security noticed and stopped her. Sometimes the really scary people come in as a guest. Story 4. When I was training for my EMT, I had to do a shift in the emergency room, just watching, maybe helping do some simple stuff. I picked the night before Halloween. It turned out to be a sad night. I was 18 years old, and they brought in a 16 or 17-year-old kid that they had stabilized in the ambulance. He was working at one of the local scare place posing as someone who was being hanged. He fell with a rope around his neck and actually hung himself. I remember seeing the x-rays and you could see where there was a gap between vertebrae. The doctor just pointed to it and said he could not tell how bad it was, but he might have become a paraplegic that night. I hope to God he got better. Story 5. We used to have a haunted house every year in the fall in my city, but too many lawsuits forced it to shut down. My dad, who works for the city and saw a lot of the cases, told me about one in particular where this one guy went into the haunted house, but was terrified of clowns. There was this one room where these clowns come out at you with chainsaws. Original, right? And the guy got so scared he grabbed one of the clowns and beat the shoot out of him, then proceeded to run away through the tarp walls of the haunted house, causing it to collapse. The poor clown then sued the haunted house for physical and emotional damage and had to be put on Prozac. Everyone who dealt with the case called him Prozac the Clown. Story 6. I gave a girl a seizure one time. That night, I was standing in a hallway dressed like an insane asylum inmate with gouged out eyes, and I had a little buzzer in my hand I could press to make the hall's strobe lights buzz and a long sound go off. I pressed the buzzer as a woman entered with her boyfriend, and at first I thought she was shaking with fear. Nope, seizure. I broke character and escorted them out the secret door and flagged down a manager. I'm sure seeing a creepy chick with gouged out eyes trying to lead you somewhere was alarming for the couple. I'm not sure what happened after. The ambulance came, but I heard she was on substances and the company I was working for didn't get sued, so I hope she's fine. Story 7. Never worked at a haunted house, but I went into one before it opened. All the actors were in a group wearing scary costumes. They were planning on where everyone was going to stand. I stood behind them and listened. When they were done and turned around to see me there, all of them screamed, which made me scream even louder. Story 8. I worked at a haunted house in high school with all my friends, and I witnessed my best friend at the time with his hands down my girlfriend's pants. Come to find out, he had drugged her, and she was very obviously drugged. I am very thankful that the chain was not attached to the chainsaw that night. Edit. Punctuation. Story 9. I got a job at a haunted house a few years ago. The day before my first day of work, I fractured my foot. I wore a boot on my leg, and they still let me work. Well, some people thought my boot was a prop, and I had several people kick my broken foot. Eventually, they had to put me up in the controls because I was a liability problem. That, and I also made 3 people pee themselves and 1 person shoot themselves. It was a fun job. Story 10. I worked at a haunted forest some years back. It had been raining pretty steadily that October, so the trails were pretty muddy and slick. At one point along the trail, a dude with a chainsaw surprised people as they came around a bend before a relatively steep descent. Watched a man throw his daughter to the side of the trail at that point and take off running, then sliding, then rolling. Seriously, kids, get a job at a scare place if you have the chance. Getting paid to scare people is fantastic. Story 11. I knew a guy who worked at one in New Jersey in the 80s. It's almost too good to be true, but he said they had a dwarf who worked with them, and while a family was in complete darkness, they would replace their child with the dwarf. And when the lights were turned on, the parent would look down and see they are holding the hand of a dwarf and would freak out. Answer. I had the exact opposite happen as a child my first time at Knott's Scary Farm. We had barely begun walking through the park and I was already clinging to my mother for dear life, eyes scattering everywhere like a terrified little mouse that hears a predator in the shadows. My mother says I'm crushing her, releases her arm for a moment, but is back again almost instantly. A whopping 100 or so feet later, I finally look up at my mother and realize she's been exchanged for a hideous witch monster. That was probably the most terrified I've ever been. Story 12. It was a few days before Halloween, and I was working on the 3D side doing a magic trick. A little girl was there with her parents and she was freaked out, but they were almost done and her parents didn't want to leave early. She got to my trick and peed herself. She cried and was getting herself really worked up. They got to the next scare and she threw up. We closed early last night. Story 13. Another worker at my haunted trail got punched in the face. I've seen a woman pee herself, and also a young man literally drag his fallen girlfriend by the legs while yelling, "Shoot, shoot, shoot." Black people are the best to scare. All of these incidents involve them. Story 14. The worst thing I've seen at my haunt didn't actually have anything to do with us being a haunted house. We had rain, wind, and hail one night and didn't get the message out fast enough to get everyone to safety. A metal sign came loose and hit a woman, a customer, not a worker, over the head at what we believed to be 40 mm Refuge. She had a concussion and spent the night in the hospital, but she was fine in the end and didn't take legal action. Other than that, I've seen people cry, have panic attacks. I saw a guy get scared and bite his presumed girlfriend's shoulder. One of our actors was kicked in the head by another actor who was swinging from a rope. Workers who've cut themselves while preparing sets. Customers who've gone out of their way to get into actor-only areas who've gotten hurt. I've been kicked. Actors are pretty frequently punched, and frequently, almost once a night, people corner smaller or younger actors and comment that they're sexy, ask for dates, intimacy, try to touch, and breathe their beer breath on you. Somehow the job is still fun and I keep going back. Story 15. I'm not a haunted house worker, but I remember one comment from a while ago, the tale of the dildo bandit. Anyways, I hope I can post it here. I'll copy and paste it here. I never worked at one, but went to one and saw something hilarious happen several years ago. Every year there was this one haunted theme park that is really strict about what you can bring in with you before you enter. The security guards were known to sometimes be jerks to people. There would be several lines, and in each line, there is a security guard that would make you empty your pockets and then pat you down. 1. Prankster in a hoodie came prepared to have some fun with a poor security guard that night. I take out my wallet, phone, etc., and place them in a tray, and as I am getting patted down, I glance over to my left and see a security guard order a guy to remove everything from his clearly overstuffed pockets. He pulls out a giant dildo and tries to hand it to the security guard. The guard puts his hands up in the air for a moment, signaling he doesn't want to touch it, and tells the guy to put it in the tray and to continue emptying his pockets with a puzzled look on his face. I get my stuff from the tray, get waved through, and wait there for my group of friends to come through. The prankster reaches into the same pocket and pulls out an even bigger dildo and puts in the tray. People start laughing, and the security guard asks, "What did you bring these for?" And the guy just shrugs, keeping a straight face, and says, "Forgot to leave them in the car." He keeps emptying out his pockets, and in his other pocket, he has 2 more gigantic dildos. By this time, everyone, including the other security guards, have paused and are laughing at the spectacle. The poor security guard sighs and says, "All right, hands above your head," and begins to pat the guy down. Then he shouts out, "Oh, for fudge's sake," once he reaches the guy's waistband. The guy lifts up his shirt and has several more dildos stuffed in his waistband. Everyone bursts out laughing again. He takes them out and places them in the tray. The security guard continues to pat the guy down, and when he gets down to his ankles, he lets out a loud sigh and goes, "Just take them out." Sure enough, the guy had 1 dildo stuffed in each sock. He takes them out and places them in the tray. Red-faced with embarrassment, the security guard says, "I can't let you take those in." The guy says, "That's fine. Can I just pick them up when I leave?" The security guard says no. The prankster, trying not to break character, says, "Ah, well, okay, you can toss them." The guard waves him through. People start applauding. As the guy is running off, he turns around and pulls a dildo out of the hood of his sweatshirt and starts waving it around and shouts to war, with the dildo held high above him, and starts running for the entrance to a maze. Everyone bursts out laughing again, cheering him on, and some guards go chasing after him and apprehend him. I don't know if he got booted from the park, but as I was walking by with my friends, they sat him down on a curb and were holding him there. People that were going in were applauding him and cheering for him, and everyone was cracking up. My friends and I were in tears. That spectacle alone made my night. My friends and I call him the Dildo Bandit, and we always have a good laugh when one of us brings it up. Story 16. I was part of a drama class in high school, and we did an annual haunted house in October. One of the idiotic kids who was only in the class for credit helped out and went crazy in our maze. He would not leave this one girl alone who was obviously scared out of her mind. He got way too close. She freaked and ran out, and he followed her to her car. She filed something with the principal, and the haunted house was canceled the next year. Story 17. My dad worked at one as a crazy guy in chains. The chains weren't actually attached, and he had a ton of makeup on. And he'd moan and scream and eventually would break out of the chains and kind of chase the people. Well, one time he saw his sister's family come through. They had no idea it was him, and he had no idea they were coming. They didn't recognize my dad, so when he saw them, he broke free and bear hugged his sister's husband and took him away to the next room, and it freaked everyone out. Story 18. I worked one for one day a few years ago to help fill in a spot. A friend of mine worked there that year, and someone called in sick in her room, so she got me to come help. That was the very first night it was open, though. Keep in mind, I don't know if it's common for haunted houses to do this, but after everything was set up and before the general public was let in, they made everyone who was working go through it by themselves. I'm not a fan of scary things, but I sucked it up, kept my head down, and scurried through. One guy, though, flat out refused, made a huge show of how ridiculous it was that he was expected to do this, etc., etc. The managers were pretty adamant about it, though, so he ended up storming off and lost his job. Story 19. Some guy grabbed a girl's boob as he laughed at her and then proceeded to punch a guy dressed as a clown. 14-year-olds trying to beat up our prowlers, people who chase you to your car, in the parking lot. Some dude gave a zombie a wet willy once. He didn't get into the house yet and was thrown out with no refund. He'd already had the rules explained to him by that point. There was one time I smashed a metal fireplace shovel in half. I'd been doing it all night. When I hit it on the ground for one tour, the thing finally snapped and they all darn near shat themselves because it made me look like a small girl with beastly strength. There was another time when I was telling this group of girls to exit my room. They were in a corner on the floor, crying their eyes out and screaming. Every time I told them to leave, they'd flip out more. It was to the point that multiple tours were about to run into each other because they wouldn't leave. Thankfully, they eventually calmed down enough to get the hint that they had to go and finally exited the room. But god darn, girls get hit on by preteens and older men all the time. I was a creepy doll once, but the creepiest thing was having an older man tell me how much he wanted to play with me. Story 20. Not a worker, but at a haunted house I went to, there were haunted hay rides. On said hayride, a guy in a ghillie suit got close, and I panicked and punched him in the face. I was like 10, but I felt so bad. Story 21. I worked in one of those amusement park Halloween fest haunted houses as a teenager. Worst thing that happened to someone else. A bunch of redneck parents dragged their son, who was maybe 7 years old, into the haunted house, despite him being terrified. I jumped out all zombified, not realizing the next group included a small child. We were alerted by motion sensors, and found myself face to face with a terrified little boy, frozen in place, tears running down his cheeks and piss running down his pant legs. His parents just laughed. I doubt they took him home to change pants. Worst thing. That happened to me. Do you know how many people try to punch, grope, feel up, hump, and molest theme park zombies? I was 14, you fudge sickos. Story 22. I volunteered at a haunted hayride through the woods. My job was to pop out and jump into the trailer and scare people. I got right in between this couple, and the guy frantically pulled his hand out of his girl's pants. Story 23. I did the Halloween attraction in a haunted fort for 2 years, and there was at least 2 kids who peed themselves. I also scared a lot of adults. Seeing people cower and jump all over each other is really hilarious. Story 24. It was cleaned up by the time I got to work, but someone had jumped the fence to the property one night and shot himself in the head with a revolver from the 20s. As far as ghosts go, I had a door continually slam in my face every time I opened it, 3 to 4 times, and when I finally said, "Stop it," the door remained opened. Edit. This is an actual haunted house, not one of the Halloween ones. Story 25. I have 2 stories from a haunted house where I used to work. This one happened as a 13-14-year-old, long before I worked there. This haunted house had a 3-story slide towards the end. However, they also had a smaller trick slide where they redirected 4 of us in my group. This trick slide led to a room that looked like a prison cell where an actor playing Freddy proceeded to scare the shoot out of one of my friends. I have never seen someone so terrified. She was screaming and cowering, and Freddy did not stop. They must have held us there for 10 to 15 minutes while we watched others. In our group passed by through the small barred window, and this one happened while I worked there. This haunted house that had a pole out front. The actor that played a clown would frequently use it to pole dance. Now, this was the best haunted house to work at because after it closed on Halloween night, all the actors aged 21 and up get to stay and drink in the house. Several of the actors decided to try out the pole, and one of them, after too much to drink, fell off the platform. Story 26. I worked at a small town haunted house that was built in an abandoned school. The best around West Tennessee, we've been told. Well, in one section, the builders had fashioned a thin hallway out of plywood walls and a floor of spring mattresses, just to screw with you in the pitch-black darkness. One night, a particularly large-framed obese gentleman clambered down this hallway, tipped and crashed through one of the plywood walls, shut down the whole operation for an hour. Story 27. I was going through a small haunted house in Alabama. There was one room that was really small, and there's a guy laying on the floor. He was supposed to act dead and jump up and scare you. Pretty lame, I know. But I was going with a friend who hadn't been, and I had gone through it before. He said that the guy was a mannequin. I told him it was a real guy, so he kicked the guy in the nuts to see. The guy started moaning and rolling around till Dr. Friend kicked a mannequin in the balls to find out it was a real person. Story 28. I didn't work there, but had a crazy experience at one. We were waiting in line to go in, and this weird girl came walking toward us. She had a small head, but these huge eyes that were opened wide. She looked possessed, and she was walking slowly and just staring at me. I thought she was part of the attraction and started laughing and trying to put my friends between her and I. I figured whatever she was going to do, she could do to them. Turns out, she wasn't part of the attraction and just looked that fudge up in real life. Oops. She had come over to us to see if we would take a picture of her group for them. Awkward. Story 29. I worked as the manager of the front gate at a theme park last fall for our Fright Fest event. Immediately after letting a guest in after not being sure if he was tipsy, he ran in and kicked a character in the balls. I felt so bad. Besides that, characters get punched quite often, mostly as an instant reaction by people when they're scared. Story 30. In one haunted house I know of, the owner wasn't getting enough visits, so he hired a young business consultant who had recently graduated from a top business school in Canada. The advice? Convince people who were visiting that they had contracted a serious respiratory disease. This meant, in part, having a fake biohazard team in bubble suits come in and adult worker them away. It was very convincing and somewhat horrifying. The idea was to upset someone so badly that they would then sue the haunted house. It would become a news story. Haunted house sued for being too scary, assuring the business a lot of visits. I'm not sure how it ended, though, of if the plan worked.